All right, so welcome back. We'll dive into this. So basically, wounds in long-term care. All right. First things first, I have no conflicts of interest to declare. Uh, some of you seen this slide before, but basically, it's important to look at data objectively. So people look at the Casper report and they see 5%, 4%. If you're a 100-bed facility, it's only 3 or 4 patients in that facility. And the smaller you are, the huger the data. So your percentage, if you have a 50-bed facility and you have 2 patients, you already have 4% of wound rate. And so, all right. So if you look at your wounds as a problem in your facility and you say, yeah, we're having high wound rates, and you're discussing what can we do, what's causing it, you need to know that 90% of this issue is failure of prevention. Now, I'm not talking about the stuff you get from the hospital. If you are looking at wounds in general, if you don't deal with the prevention as an issue and we're consumed with non-healing wounds, we're wasting statistical time, basically. Your non-healing wound percentage is usually much smaller than the preventable wounds that you can stop from all the admissions. Right. So did I mention prevention? So the one thing I find either not talked about or is not really applied effectively is the level of communication between the different disciplines. So while everybody knows what the doctor orders are, the TAR has the treatment plan, the nurses hopefully know exactly how to do the treatment, the communication with the CNAs is totally missing. So this, you do that dressing, you spend half an hour doing it, you're documenting it, and you go for your break and come back and the CNA calls you because you need to do it again, it came off, patient had to go to the bathroom, and the dressing came off. So it's very important, especially in wounds where the location is really in the peri area, that the CNAs know how to protect that dressing, number one. Number two, they're not going to protect that dressing diligently unless they know for sure what it means. So if you tell them that, look, if this dressing comes off 3 times a day, it will peel off the skin and it will cause more issues. And it's very important for that dressing to stay on for 1 week. And they can heal in 2 weeks if that happens. They will pay attention. And if you're looking at specific communication being difficult, you know, we say, well, we don't have time. So in all the stuff that we do, we don't have time to sit down with the CNAs and talk about wound cases that they have special needs. The answer to that is the same when somebody says, I want eggs every morning. We had a case recently. And we say, well, the kitchen doesn't do meals individually. But think about it. If you have a 100-bed or let's say 60-bed, and you only have one person who wants eggs, or you have, if you look at all the people who are super particular, who are losing weight, you have 3 people who want something super particular. How hard is it to do 3? It's hard to do 50, but it's not that hard to do 3. Same thing applies to wound communication. It's not that hard to communicate about 3 residents. It's hard to communicate about 50 individuals, but not 3. So I call that shrink the problem so it's solvable. All right, so some people have huddles and consider that as communication. I see huddles as post-mortem. You know, huddles will tell you what happened wrong and people can talk about it. But in order to proactively communicating something to prevent an issue, it needs to be an immediate discussion. So not a morning routine huddle, but more, let's get together 5 minutes. We need to talk about this. So that kind of huddle I like. All right. The underutilized tools here mostly is a data gap. I think most facilities, and we've started to go over our data more specifically, but most facilities barely have data that separates acquired from inherited. So you can't solve it if you don't know the extent of it. All right. So, I mean, this is preaching to the choir. The preventative care centers around the high-risk patients on admission. So when somebody is admitted, they shouldn't have preventative orders after the doctor sees them. It should start on the day they come in, and that should be self-evident. If somebody has a stroke, has a hip fracture, is clearly debilitated and bedbound on arrival, they have a 4+ edema. Those cases are they need the preventative care started on admission. The other things that are preventative, especially in vascular wounds, is the footwear. You won't believe how many people have issues from their $500 shoes, and that's how we end up with a vascular ulcer. And you can imagine me trying to convince the resident or their family member that that $500 shoe need, and they paid $500 each. I need to cut it open with a scalpel to create a hole so that there's no pressure on their toe. But anyway. Failure to thrive cases, they're easily identifiable when they come in, especially of the return residents that you know. And that's not an inclusive list, exclusive list, I think. So addressing the root cause is very important. And sometimes, you know, it's like dementia with behavior. Sometimes people would say, oh, I don't know what the trigger is. But we all know that there's always a trigger, we just don't know it. In case of wounds, there's no pressure ulcer that develops without pressure. So if we don't know the root cause, it's just we didn't look enough, or it's beyond the information that we have. So if somebody says we don't know, and they're always saying we don't know, you start looking yourself. And that root cause analysis can involve PT department. Sometimes they can see things that, you know, we can't see in terms of equipment, etc., transportation, cushions, etc. The other issue is of course the appropriate wound treatment. Now this is, I mentioned this, not that there is a magic bullet or magic treatment for dressing, but it needs to be purposeful. We can't say, stage 3 ulcers, we have this protocol. It needs to be case specific. What's the drainage level? Are you controlling drainage? Are you worried about too much moisture? Are you worried about too little moisture? Are you worried about bacterial overload? Is there an infection element, etc.? Those things matter, and so a treatment based on protocol that doesn't know what the purpose is not going to be effective. Consistency and application of treatment, and that we talk about it, but you won't believe how often it happens that the treatment is not consistent. So the more you audit, the more you'll find out that the treatment itself is not consistent. Now what I find is that people who audit the treatment never do the treatment. And so it becomes really, you can't teach something if you don't know it. And you can't find it if you don't know it. So if you do a chart review and documentation review as an audit for wounds, that's a waste of time. All right. So the auditing of consistency, I usually think the DO1 and administrator should be walking around and seeing those 3 or 4 cases. Again, they can't walk around and see 50 or 100. But they can walk around and see 3 wound cases. And because the administrator is the one writing the checks, and the DON is the one doing the evaluations, they might get somewhere, because I think doctors have less influence on this issue. All right, so, and we discussed that. So face-to-face auditing, not chart auditing. And the unit level auditors need to be able to do the dressing. So in Yale, they had a model. They said, you know, you see one, you do one, you teach one. And that's applicable to wound care. All right, so wound products. First of all, don't be intimidated by the new wound products that come out every day, okay? All you have to do is really ask what category it is and know your categories, or read about them so you know each category. And then if they say it's a new category, then you say, what does it do? Okay. What does it actually do? And the answer cannot be, it's a good dressing and it heals the wound. Okay? It needs to specifically have a purpose and a goal and a means to do it. Okay? And last but not least, say how much. Okay? Because you could have a wonderful product, but it's $100 for each dressing, or 50, or if you get it cheap, 20. It's if you can do it cheaper, why not? And you heard the previous talk. You need to do it. All right, so that's one of these products that popped up, and that's one of my colleagues brought it up and showed it to me. And again, so you look it up. What is this? This is an ABD, basically, equivalent, that has a surface that functions like a telfa, so it doesn't stick, but wicks like an ABD. So the only thing left is how much does it wick compared to an ABD, and you can test that easily. Put a little bucket of water, you drop one, and see how many cc's it pulls. Okay, it's doable. And then you check the price. And sometimes I use ABDs so they can stick on purpose. And then when I remove them, I wet them for 15 minutes. So I do the wetting, I go to my next patient, come back and remove it. Because, and this is a different issue, but I'm giving as an example. If you have a venous ulcer, what's the issue with that dressing? It's oozing constantly. That wound is oozing and that dressing saturates. When a dressing sticks, I can use it to my advantage. If it sticks, it plugs that hole. But again, if it does your thing, this is a great secondary dressing, okay? Also, so if you have a wound that's draining a lot and you have a secondary need, you do that if you want to reinforce it. But like I said, I don't have any affiliation. I don't get paid by mentioning them, but this is an example of a new product that you look what it does and what it contains. All right. This is a new favorite, right? Some of you know this. So Prisma, what does it do, right? And what does it compare to? And I'm sorry, I jumped through that too quickly, but Prisma is basically your Fibocol with an added component, okay? And these are the added components. So cellulose, and this is the NIH website, and they're a very good resource for like telling you what the data is on new things. So they looked at this. Is it useful? They found that it is, okay? Is it useful enough to switch from your Fibocol, which is now generic and it's been around for 20 years, to this? Let's look. It says there's no clinical data comparing the two, okay? So it does do the same thing. It has a mesh that's a cellulose that's new, but it has collagen, which is Fibocol, and it's a combination product. So if you want to try it, you get in samples, etc., that's fine, but know that it's a collagen brother or sister or cousin, and it's a similar product to collagen, okay? And that's the reference. All right, so the combination, if you're trying to sell a new product, the combination of existing well-known products is a very popular way to get something into the market. If people already use collagen and you incorporate collagen, if people already know alginates, you incorporate alginate. Silver, you incorporate that. And so this is, the previous product had silver and they had collagen and they added a third item. And I remember the days when Combiderm was the first combination product. And it used to be a Duderm with a gauze in the center. Okay? And we all got excited for about 3 years. And then they came up with Tegaderm with pad. Because, this way you don't have to, God forbid, put a little Telfa first, then put a Tegaderm on it, you can pay an extra $10 and get it all prepackaged. And we now have hydrocolloid with alginate. You've seen the Duderm with the Aquacel. Those are the ones that come out of orthopedist offices, and they should stay on for at least 7 days unless they get saturated. Now the hydrogel, even the hydrogel, which is just a moisture, basically, environment, they added things to it like silver. So it can be in the market as a new product. It is a new product, but again, did anybody ever compare hydrogel with silver? The answer is no, because you don't want to have that kind of data that, you do the data to prove that it works, and it's not, all of the products you see on the market have data to prove that they work. Okay, they're not required to do head-to-head, because if it's similar to another product, they want to replace the other product. They don't want to prove that they're the same efficacy. They want to say better. And part of me thinks they do it in secret, but they don't tell us. But I can tell you the data is not out there for comparison. So that's the Combiderm, but even the Combiderm looks more elegant and cute now. It used to be really very rugged. All right. So I just included this from previous slide, the alginates and alginate cousins like Medihoney and collagen, etc. There were days where you can get Sorpsan at a fraction of the cost, but now it's Aquacel, and then Aquacel became Aquacel AG, and so forth. So the moral of this slide is really, it's not about what you're using, it's about what you're getting out of it and what your purpose from the treatment is. Do you want to dry the wound? Do you want to keep it wet? Do you want to do it frequently? Do you want to do it less often? And this is, it's not about the product. You can put a foam product and get this result. And you can see this person had 2 different foams coming from the hospital. Okay? It's a protocol. People follow the protocol and they do it. But again, you got to have a practical way of addressing it. All right, so I'm going to do a few case reviews, both to review treatment and to do staging, because it's after lunch and I don't want you falling asleep. So a couple of principles about heels. Number 1, don't debride it if you can. Okay? Any extensive deep debridement of the heel is not a great idea. It opens that wound up for the environment and infections. Having said that, not that I never debride, but if you debride, you partial debride, and if you auto debride, guess which part comes off first? So let's say you put a tegaderm on this or a duderm on a heel. Which part auto debrides first, the center or the periphery? Now, which part is a softer tissue? Periphery. Why? Because the center is like leather, the periphery is attached to skin, and so sometimes when I want to do sharp debridement slowly, I put a tegaderm or a duderm on it for a week. I come out and I stop doing that. That edge would have lifted. Okay? Then I can do slow, sharp debridement from the edge. Okay? Right. But I don't go in and remove that eschar like a surgeon would, which they do sometimes at the hospital. Because that's automatically creating osteo, because that bone is now exposed. But that's only from our geriatric point of view. This lecture was presented by a surgeon. They may have a different point of view. All right. Elevation of the foot. Okay, I've never done a wound lecture without mentioning this. If you elevate the foot using a pillow, unless it's a magic pillow, that pillow will not stay where you leave it. You will boost that resident, and that heel will be on top of that pillow. And when you do your root cause analysis, what caused the heel ulcer? It's you. Okay. Right. And the other thing that it does is that sometimes the pillow gravitates under the knee. And what that does is lifts the knee and brings down the heel and digs in. So nothing against pillows, but not for this. All right, this is an old slide of mine, but this is a good illustration of xeroderma, very dry skin, okay? Now, what else is wrong with this picture?
Well, he's got a cord underneath the back of his heel.
He had a vac. That's a vac for a heel ulcer.
Toenail was pretty bad.
Yeah, and how about this?
Edema, dressing in the wrong place.
Too tight?
I know, I mean, when I see this, I don't call this a dressing, that's a tourniquet, right? So that person has vascular disease to begin with, and they have venous ulcers too. And that was a tourniquet. So anytime we do a dressing for the lower extremity, we need to make sure it starts at the toes, okay? Otherwise, you're compressing halfway. All right, this is 6 weeks out. Okay. Now, I do want to mention a new product that I like. Okay. All right. So this is an emollient. Okay. Now, in our facility at Durgan, we replaced Eucerin and the A&D with emollient. The reason is when you're using a moisturizer, it's very hard to put on for the entire body. Emollients, number one, they're easy to apply and they go a very long way. Like this little bottle is $7, and it's huge. It's this big. So you could have a person with their own bottle for a whole week, 2 weeks, potentially a month for $7. It's not a bad product to have. And the other is that instead of adding moisture, it traps your own moisture, which is also very good. So when people coming out of showers, which is the most time that we have dryness inducing activity, is the shower, or especially when they're in sit baths, in the bathtub. That event can cause more dryness unless you use an emollient after. If you want maximum effect, you apply it wet. So you don't dry the person super dry and then apply this, because you want to trap what's on the surface of the skin. One caveat is if somebody overuses it, it can plug the pores. So if you see them developing like acne-like, you should know that you overdid it. All right. Okay. So that dressing is, remember we said the consistency of care? So if nobody's checking every shift, even though this dressing is once a week or once every 3 days, every shift somebody needs to be checking. And if the CNAs put the socks on top of tuber grips and they don't know how to put them on, they always shift. And they shift up like multiple times. At the end of the day, you have the dressing shifted so far up that the person is draining into the tuber grip. All right, so that's the proper way of doing it, okay? It covers the toes, but one thing you should remember is that you don't want to flip it over the toes and make it like it's holding it down to put the socks on, because that would create, for vascular patients, would create pressure on the toes. So ideally, you want it to cover the toes, but not flip over it. Any dressing. All right, so this is my desperate act. One day when I had to draw the toes on the tuber grip to remind people to keep it in that position. Okay. And when this didn't work, this is the medicine cabinet at Durgan Pond. All right. So this is another issue, right? So I've learned how to do arrows now. So you can see where's that pillow and how far down that block here is causing a sacral ulcer right now. Again, so in your root cause analysis, what's causing this person's sacral ulcer is that pillow. Okay? Because you're turning them, you're going through the trouble of turning them, but then you put in the pillow over the area where you're trying to resolve a wound. So how do you know where to put the pillow? The iliac crest. So where my belt goes, that's where this line is. Nothing below that. Okay? So belt and above. Now, it won't look as pretty, and the person may not be fully turned and tucked, right? But that's not the purpose. If you turn the torso, you don't have to tuck the glutes under anything. They're turned enough to relieve that pressure. Okay? All right, first do no harm. All right, so what is this wound? That's somebody's head, by the way. All right. Can this be a pressure ulcer? Yeah, if they're standing on their heads, or if somebody, or if a pillow. I won't blame it on pillows in this case. But unless there's some structure, you know, a headwear or something, this was a traumatic ulcer, and you can see this person picked elsewhere, okay? And so they picked that. But the reason I show that is it's important to document the cause. Otherwise, your MDS will show you have pressure ulcer, where in fact this is a traumatic ulcer. You're not going to be penalized for a traumatic ulcer, okay? And the treatment is different. There's no pressure to relieve. All you got to do is make sure the nails are cut, okay? And then the area is covered. And if they still, we've had cases where we got so desperate that we had to make them wear hats all the time. So this is another traumatic ulcer. And this lady actually died last week. Not from this, but, and so this was a trauma during transfers. Yeah. And she ended up in the ER, and she came back, and so this is a week later. Huh, shoot. Did you see the 2 months out?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I missed it too fast. So unfortunately, she didn't go with a fully healed, but it was 90% healed. And she was malnourished, failure to thrive. She had anemia, which she had transfusion for. But so we were proud of. At least we almost got that. But I was upset that it didn't fully heal before she went to St. Peter's. So this coming one is a chronic wound that came to us from the hospital, but it was managed on the outside with Medihoney and foam dressings. And my brain made me put the first one here. I don't know why, but so the first one is here, and then here, and here, and then here.
Oh, but you got arrows, you're good.
Yeah, I added the arrows. Okay, so one question here is that, see this? I mean, one of the principles of wound healing, people would say, we want to encourage granulation tissue. You see here is fungating tissue, okay? So you're encouraging all kind of tissue growth, but there's no epithelialization. There's nothing coming from inwards. The last step is arrested, and you have a non-healing wound. In this case, any wound that's been open for 6 months, or like this one, you'll have a lot of bacteria in it. So all we did here is clean that wound, okay? The magic dressing here, okay, was an ABD and tuberculin. And once a week I would clean it. And so I wasn't worried about cytotoxics and causing growth arrest, etc. That wound had plenty of opportunity to grow between changes because we cleaned it, and I used cytotoxics on that cleaning. but then it was with cleanser afterwards. It's nice and neat and clean and bacteria free. And then the ABD was wicking all the extra drainage that was coming out, and the lady nominated me for sainthood. So, venous ulcers. I gotta do something about venous ulcers because it's so common, but I mean, we underestimate how difficult it is to get a venous ulcer healed and how fast they get more of them. So the venous ulcer issue is an edema issue. Just like when you have hyponatremia, it's not a salt issue, it's a water issue. A venous ulcer is not a skin issue, it's a water issue. If you don't control your edema, you're going to spin your wheels forever, okay? And you see all kind of people sitting in recliners and supposedly elevating their legs, or sitting in the chair with the little stools that they put their heels on, and thinking that's elevation. That's not. So we have a patient now, and he naps in his chair. So I'd say unless he's doing something, if he's napping, he's in bed. And if he's in bed, it needs to be lifted up. And of course, the other thing is God created meds for this. If his kidney allows it, in this case, I would take more fluid out. So this particular case has stage 3 kidney disease that I'll show you next. We added Zeroxolin. We're monitoring his labs very closely because he has Lasix and Zeroxolin. But if you control the edema, you heal the wound. There's no magic to it. Control the edema and drainage. Okay. So this one that we got, what, is it 2 weeks or last week? And stage 3 edema is very immobile, chronically malnourished, dysphagic, has a modified diet which he hates, so eats less. And other than that, he's okay. And we actually did good the first, this was 2 days after arrival. And when the nurses got him and reported it, this had a lot more, like this was deeper and more angry. So I'm taking this picture not as a start picture, but really a follow-up after 2-3 days. And you can see that area that you saw earlier, how it's closing. And then the bottom area where it was blistering, it's evolving. Now this ulcer is, I put it here. So when you saw it at first, I mean, most people would say that's a small ulcer. And you say, what stage? Say it's tiny. Does tiny make it to stage 2 or 3? Just because it's tiny, there's still fat in there, okay? Anytime you see subcutaneous tissue, it's a stage 3, even if it's a pinpoint, okay? So this is a tiny, tiny stage 3, not stage 2. Okay. Okay. All right. So how about this? What stage is this?
Stage 3.
All right, so the fat part is stage 3.
Is it slough or fat?
This is fat because
Okay.
how do you know? That's a good point. I first clean, then stage. So slough will move, fat doesn't. All right, and this area here is dark and necrotic. That's an unstageable area. That is slough. In fact, it's somewhere in the stage between slough and eschar. It's getting dark. Okay, so you can have a stage 3 ulcer with an unstageable area somewhere in the ulcer, and you have to document it and say how big it is and how much.
But is it not correct that if it's unstageable, it's classified as a pool?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore.
No. In fact, you're lucky with that now, because unstageable, like especially with deep tissue injury. Deep tissue injury can go to 4,
Yes.
or can end up with a dry skin and peel like a blister. So you stay deep tissue injury unstageable, and then it peels like a blister, and you never have anything on the MDS that would count towards you. But this, I mean, it used to be. We even used to have like different classification with the blisters. If it's red blister, it used to be considered deeper automatically. Now it's not. Blister is stage 2. It can be with deep tissue injury or not. And I don't have a picture on that one. So we talk about eschar not being removed. This is the opposite of a heel eschar. This is an eschar that needs to be debrided. You don't know what's under it, and there's redness around it. So you have sign of infection, and you have an eschar. You have dead tissue. That needs to be explored. Now, whether it's partial or complete, that depends on how stable the patient is. But this would usually be associated with WBC increase, if not temperature. And it would need antibiotic treatment. All right. When it comes to debridement, and because I said debridement there, I'll mention this. So you have enzymatic, auto debridement, shock debridement, or a combination. The combination is what I mentioned earlier. I would do auto debridement to lift the edges, and then I let it dry and I chip away on the edges. Anything with do auto debridement, it just depends on how aggressive you want to be. Let's say a wound is wet or has high drainage. If you leave that wound dressing on for a day longer or 2 days longer, that does auto debride. Okay, so don't think it's all or nothing. Sometimes you're auto debriding without meaning to. Okay, the more dry it is, the less auto debridement you will see. If you want it auto debriding, you make it wetter. But I usually I don't sit around 2 weeks waiting. So I'd rather put a Tegaderm or Duderm on, leave it on between 3 to 7 days. I can see what's going on because the Tegaderm is transparent. I can see, but I gotta warn my nurses first that you will see a bubble of pus building up under that Tegaderm because that's intentional. And not to call the family first and call me.